Hello, everybody. This is Gynarchists Awakening. I have to redo this video. Long story short, what can Gynarchists learn from Mosuo's Matriarchal society? I think this is very fascinating. I mean, I don't know if I can link it, but if you look up Mosuo health effects on women, something like that, you will find articles about it. There was a study conducted. And they found that there was lower inflammation and lower blood pressure for the women living in that society than there was for the patrilineal societies in other parts of Mosuo. So that is definitely very fascinating. And what can we as Gynarchists, what can we take from this, and why does this even work? What is it about their housing arrangements in particular that work so damn well? And I think when I was thinking about what raises my blood pressure, what causes me stress, I have to kind of look back to sort of the way things were for me personally in my home, which wasn't a particularly good one. And then sort of compare and contrast. And what I found is that if you have something called, if you're in a household where the grandmother is making the decision, well, what we have right here is we have the grandmother living with the mother or the daughter, which is very fascinating. And the grandmother is in charge of the financial decisions and what goes on in the household, and chores that men would normally do apparently are doled out to women. So I think that in this particular case, what we have is a situation where a woman is not being isolated from the support system from her other family. So that provides a greater degree of security and well-being for the daughter. In whatever romantic situation she happens to be in. We have other cultures where people sort of just strike out on their own. They live with their significant other, but nobody else. They don't do that over in Mosuo. It doesn't seem like, not from what I've read about it. But of course, information. I take it all in a little bit at a time, and what I see, and I am genuinely fascinated by, is this walking marriage concept where the man can come over for romantic rendezvous, but he needs to be back home before sunset, and he lives with his family. He doesn't live with the mother, and the uncle of the child usually raises the son. This is absolutely fascinating. It's not the father that raises the child, but the uncle that does so. So I think that this is a very interesting society, in that a member of your family, somebody you raise with and is the one you entrust with raising your child, but not necessarily the father. I think that's pretty intelligent. But how does this work? How does the housing situation that they have help women and girls with their health? I think the first thing it does is it does provide that sense of security, of course. I also think that having a meaningful amount of separation between women and men is also important. In other words, I don't think that men and women are necessarily emotionally or socially compatible with each other to the extent where they should be living together all the time. I think that, and I heard the stories, you hear them about men and women getting into these prolonged arguments, screaming, having heated discussions. I mean, if this is going on all day long, it's going to stress you the fuck out. It's going to fuck with your health. So there's that part of the problem. There's also the fact that the housing situation might be set up to better protect the girls and the women. So if you are in a situation where the husband basically can't just lay his hands on the woman because he can't abuse privacy in this way. In other words, because there's the grandmother is there, because the other people there, that acts as a sort of reminder to the would-be predator, which would be the male. Because we've had plenty of stories in the West about men abusing privacy to molest girls, rape their wives, so on and so forth. But any predator male going into one of these homes knows that not only are you going to have to deal with the grandmother, but you may have to deal with other members of the family too, like the uncle. So having that kind of situation where the male cannot isolate the woman alone through and try to force a situation where it's only him and her in the room, I think that does lend itself towards the girls and the women feeling safer, especially for their housing arrangements, especially since there is a greater degree of safety in numbers and people being together and cohabitating under that kind of matriarchal hierarchy. I do think that that helps. Because the more authority you give to the males while at the same time giving them their own space with the women, the greater the risk you have of the male trying to do something, closing the blinds, making sure that some people like to buy homes or places that have soundproof walls. I mean, it can get pretty ugly. That being said, what else could possibly contribute to lower inflammation and blood pressure? And I think that there are definitely other factors involved. For instance, I've heard radical feminists and others talk about this idea of having to raise, children, as in their husband and their kids. The husband is not taking responsibility. There have been these pictures that have circulated on X, I believe them, of men letting dishware stack up in the kitchen, just leaving it all over the place uncleaned, forcing a situation where somebody has to clean it or only clean part of it, which is really fucked up because especially if you're a woman in the West and you're already working a 9 to 5, and then you have to do this additional labor too, it's going to mess with you. There's some jobs for which the amount of physical energy you need to complete it never change. Like, for example, vacuuming. Unless somebody is tossing shit on the floor, then that's different. But if your floor is clean, then at least there's some consistency in beginning to end for how much cleaning you're going to have to do. So if a male is tossing shit unless a male is tossing shit on the floor and leaving it there, they're like, what is it? Carpet is not just going to magically grow like grass does. Like, you're not going to find more carpet on your room the next day. Windows are not going to change their dimensions. They're still going to be the same amount, size, height, width. But we got a problem here, which is if the male gets to control reproduction and not the woman, then you have a problem. And I think this is another crucial aspect of it, which is because the women in these communities are the ones who are in charge of, or who are not only in charge of their homes, but are in charge of the sort of the interactions between the home. In other words, they get to decide what is and isn't going to be acceptable in terms of boundary making or breaking. I think that what is going on here is pretty clever, because in walking marriages, if they decide to cut ties, they're able to do so fairly easily without it seriously affecting the finances of either family. So they've sort of set up a situation where marriages don't actually cost anybody on either side seriously, which I think is a very, very mature way to handle a marriage. So in other words, the way we set things up in the West, we set it up to where somebody has to pay somebody else after there's a marriage. But in Mosuo, they don't do that. And I think that can definitely contribute to feeling less stressed, because if you're going through a marriage and you're worrying about who's going to be awarded finances or who's going to lose money, if people are going to act out vendettas because they've lost money or they're going to be angry or upset, Mosuo sets a situation up to where both parties can just leave. And I think that also having this control, having the woman, the grandmother, in control, gives the mother of the child more room to decide how many children she wants. What if she says, okay, look, I can only handle one or two. I can't handle any more than this. And the grandmother probably be naturally involved in child rearing along with the other parents and along other adults in the family. If it turns out that it's not like a Muslim society where the Muslim can keep maritally raping the wife or whatever, uh, and to the point where she's having all sorts of health problems and issues, and she's stressed out because children in having kids involves so much labor, not just the labor, like not just labor involved in childbirth and in carrying the pregnancy to term, but there's psychological effects, emotional effects, physical effects that can come from the pregnancy, as well as taking care of that child. Because as I said earlier, a carpet's not going to grow extra carpet. A window doesn't grow extra windows. However, the more children you have, the more laundry you're going to have to do, the more you're going to have to cook. That means you're also going to probably have to use up more dishware. So you might end up, and you're going to have to expend other resources on them. You have to spend more money to feed them. Someone that might require more physical work might have to get a second job. The more children you have, the more responsibility that you're going to have. And if the other individual, especially the male, is not taking responsibility for the housework and is pushing it on the woman, well, that would be a problem if they lived together, right? Because then you'd have the husband saying, I don't want to do this or I don't want to do that, and always opting out, putting it on the woman. So in addition to the woman having to do the 9 to 5, then she has to do all these chores. Then after the chores, after the housework, she has to tend to the children. She has to childbirth. So it's just all this extra work adds more stress. And I find that especially if you look at certain other countries that are overworked and are stressing themselves to death, you find that the more a society pushes itself in its labor, the more detrimental it's going to be to their health. That's something that has been commonly known now. There's a reason why some countries only have 4-day work weeks. It's because there is a price to pay for that success, for putting in all that extra work. Is it going to benefit or pay off? In some ways, yes, but the health of the woman and the girls in the household may not be one of them. But I could have totally missed the mark here. Does anybody else have any other possible explanation for why these housing arrangements? It could have just been the society as a whole, but do you think the housing arrangements have any are they the primary factor that is contributing to the health of the women and girls? Anyways, thank you for your time. I appreciate it, and I hope you have a great day.